The first parasitic element of the story actually begins in the opening moments, with the Kim family searching for Wi-Fi to leech off other people's resources. One of the more on-the-nose pieces of symbolism to the film is the pizza box training video. The only white person in the film is capitalism personified, teaching the working class from across the planet to slave away for pennies. The large window in the park's living room has an eerie similarity to a cinema set, and it even has a ratio of 21:9. The outside world is nothing but disconnected entertainment to the elite Park family. The new homeowners move swiftly into the house at the end of the film, affirming the nature of the wealthy as parasites on society. They multiply quickly and can replace one another at a moment's notice. Removing one without curing the sickness of the overall system changes nothing. In case you missed it, Park Da-song's paintings aren't actually of himself, they're of the ghost, Gwan-se, locked in the basement. Ms. Park's egocentrism has herself convinced that it's the abstract genius of her son's self-portraits, as she can't see a world beyond her family. And while we're talking about the incredibly depressing character that is Gwan-se, the fact that Mr. Park never notices him switching on the light is a larger metaphor. The rich are ignorant to what the poor must go through for them to live a life of excess. And a final point for Gwan-se, to give the man some respect, his dying scream to Mr. Park is a representation of wealth fetishization. Some people will worship the rich to their dying breath, while the wealthy will never even know their name. One of the most powerful narrative choices by director Bong Joon-ho is that nobody is demonized or worshipped. While the Kims are our protagonists, the Parks aren't exactly evil. They are out of touch, carefree and condescending, sure, but never evil. This makes for a far more interesting and thought-provoking film. A subtle message weaved into the film is the impact of climate change on humanity. Bong Joon-ho has said that the flooding in the film is meant to convey the desperate inequality that the world will experience. The poor will have their homes completely destroyed, while the wealthy will only have a camping trip ruined. This morbid marketing poster for the film shows the idea clearly. Those at the top of society will escape, while those at the bottom will drown. Speaking of flooding, the film is, and pardon the pun, saturated with the motif of water. It highlights the movie's message on class. It always flows down, never up. During the flood, we see families using buckets to try to clear out the water, but it's all futile. They will never rise above their poverty. A little screenplay over-analysis for you, but at the beginning of the film when Ki-woo is unable to find Wi-Fi from the new coffee shop around the corner, Ki-Jung explains, "I'm not getting shit," as she stands by the toilet trying to find a signal. At the end of the film, she's sitting on this same toilet, now on the receiving end of all the shit she could ever want. Now you might be thinking this one is a bit of a stretch, but remember, you've now been able to rewatch the coolest shot in the movie, so you're welcome. The family's properties can be interpreted very literally. The Parks have a mansion you need to ascend into, a massive hill followed by stairs. It's something aspirational. On the other hand, the Kims live in a half basement, below ground but still catching the sunlight, a small ray of hope that just maybe they can achieve wealth too. In a similar vein, the rich never have to look down, figuratively and literally. They never notice the Kims hiding under the table, or the sliding tracks for the hidden passageway, and the few moments when they do have to look down, they are disgusted. In the Park household, we're often treated to long shots of empty hallways, people separated by large distances and furniture, or even windows. Alternatively, in the Kim house, we always see them physically close. Wealth is nothing to sneeze at, but it's certainly not a cure for loneliness. If you look closely, you can see the law books in the basement that Gwan-se has been reading. In Korea, if you can pass the incredibly competitive bar exam, then you have a shot at a better life. Depressingly, his study material is almost certainly out of date. The Scholar Stone, symbolic of the Kim family's aspirations throughout the film, floats in the flooded basement, showing that the dream to pursue wealth is hollow, vacant, and false. They were promised a lie. On that point, the movie does little to hide its overall message, as Ki-woo is literally struck on the head by the story's metaphor. His hopes and dreams crash against his poor noggin. Although, if the stone was real, then that noggin would have been caved in pretty badly, so things definitely could have been worse. The opening and closing shots of the film both pan down to Ki-woo. In the first, he holds his phone and the sky is bright. By the end, the sky has darkened and he now uses a pen and paper. After the exertions of the narrative and all his suffering, their circumstances have materially worsened. Their short 2 family members, hope has leached from their lives, and they've now stepped backwards in the technology they use. How's that for an ending? Mr. and Mrs. Park get kind of kinky on the couch as though they're in the back seat of the car, dirty underpants and all. While it's impermissible for their driver to cross the line and do this, the same rules just don't apply to the elite. Being poor is a fetish that they can enjoy completely risk-free. On the note of fetishizing, the Native American culture is prolific throughout the film. The mother calls her son a fanboy, that this is his newest phase of interest. Basically, natives aren't a real group to people of the Park family, and they are something to recreate and fanboy over with cheap plastic imitations purchased off Amazon. Placing the teepee outside of the park's cinema-like window again affirms that the native history is a passing interest, a channel to be changed at a moment's notice. This cultural appropriation is then shattered as Mr. Kim stabs Mr. Park, stripping off his boss's headset while his own falls off. He has literally torn away the consumerist, appropriating facade of Mr. Park and tossed away his own degrading servitude. Bong Joon-ho has also discussed this moment, saying that in the climax, when the volcano erupts and that explosive moment happens, just before that, Mr. Park and Ki-Taek were both wearing the Native American headdresses, and Ki-Taek throws his headdress away to stab Mr. Park, and it's sort of symbolizing his intent to get out of this role-playing that he's doing. But oh boy, that knife ain't role-playing. The director took his Native American imagery even further, having Gwansei walk into the party with blood splattered on his face, a mock representation of the First Peoples war paint. The film's violent climax wasn't only foreshadowed by the Native American imagery, as Ms. Park also has the tables for the barbecue placed into the famous Korean military crane formation from the 1592 Battle of Hudson Island. Depressing parallel shots between the mother sorting through her massive wardrobe and the refugees now sorting through a generic massive pile of donated clothes is a shot that needs little explanation. Get some rest. You must be tired after yesterday. Again, upper class doesn't equal bad, it equals oblivious. The Kims were hiding in the house for hours, drenched in rain, trying to salvage what they could from home, and spent a restless night in a community hall. But still, the minor inconvenience against the wealthy is more prominently recognized. And obliviousness seems to be a trend. Ms. Park places her feet up beside Mr. Kim's head as she's being driven from the shops. Disrespectful and thoughtless in any culture. Still, she sniffs and winds down the window to flush out the poor people's scent. Ms. Kim jokes early on that if Mr. Park came home they would all scatter like cockroaches. We actually see this happen. The father and siblings scurry out from under the table when the Parks arrive home from their camping trip. Mr. Park's often repeated statement, "Don't cross the line," is one of the film's recurring themes. He was physically confronted by the idea of his driver having sex in the backseat, physically crossing the barrier that keeps them apart, but also that the poor should not step out of line and aspire too high, leaving their lower status. And it's easy to miss, but Mr. Kim is actually given a very early introduction to this line. When he first meets Mr. Park, separated by a glass window, they are in viewing distance but still worlds apart. Mr. Kim is given a glimpse of his life, but nothing more. Ki-Taek's true understanding of the line kicks in at the climax. Mr. Park doesn't even look at Ki-Jung, glance over the line as she dies, because the line separates those lives which are meaningful and those which aren't. And that line is simply too severe for Ki-Taek to endure. During a play fight, Ms. Kim says Ki-Taek would never harm her, as he doesn't have a backbone in his body. Later in the movie, he proves her very wrong and kills for his family's honor. My original read on this was that her taunt was ironic foreshadowing, but the more I dwell on it, the more I think Bong Joon-ho is showing that even those with no motivation to harm others can be pushed to breaking point under our current corrupt, divisive, and soul-eroding culture. The fight that broke out at the barbecue and the majority of the violence in the film is between poor characters. The wealthy attendants simply watch or flee. The reality of our society is that the impoverished people are manipulated into being pitted against one another, while those at the top will almost always avoid the real physical consequences. Ki-Jung is the most at home in the upper class environment because she's the most ruthless. She understands that to rise up in society, you must be ready to pull others down. We see this in full flight when she tells her family to shut up and worry about themselves. At that moment, thunder strikes like a divine judgment of heaven, sealing her fate. And boy, was her fate a tough pill to swallow. Her death reinforces the futility of trying to maneuver through social hierarchy. The director has also commented on this, saying all these characters come under incredible, horrific violence at the end. The daughter and the son and everyone in the family. On the screen, it almost feels like it would be the son who would die here and not the daughter. But of course, at the end, it's the daughter that dies. I think that's why it feels so tragic. I really wanted to bring out that sort of irony. The person who tried to create the opportunity to avoid the tragedy, she's the one who died. And that is where we find our sad irony in the climax. The Kim father ended up in the basement, seizing the lowest physical location in the house, reinforcing that there's always a need to be somebody at the very bottom in a competitive society. The polite demeanor of the Parks is a facade. On the surface, they seem more righteous and respectful than the Kims, but that's only because their wealthy position allows them to be. The Kims seem more morally bankrupt, fighting, murdering, and sneaking around because they don't have the luxury of being polite. Like the Kim mother says, money is an iron that removes creases, but the Kims have never had the money to hide their wrinkles. On the other hand, the Park children are rather blameless. They never talk about the line because they don't yet understand it. Discrimination and a belief in a dividing line between the classes is a learned behavior. We even see the children's generosity, or at least their neutrality. With this, the director is commenting that the children aren't yet fully indoctrinated into the class system, and they aren't biased because they don't truly understand it. Sadly, as they grow older, they will likely adopt the divisive beliefs of their parents. For those hoping for a happy ending for the Kim family, I would bet against it. The song played at the end of the film, Soju, One Glass, is actually sung by the actor who plays Ki-woo and details the beginning of his journey to freeing his father, though if the script is anything to go by, he didn't get very far. Now let's turn to the title of the film. The choice of the name Parasite is so captivating because it has an insane number of potential readings. The most on-the-nose reading is that the Kims each leech off a single member of the Park family. Mr. Kim even says, all the money from their family is coming into ours. But we also see the Park mother say that despite everything, money is going well at the moment. Even with a whole family draining from them, it's not even a dent. In late capitalism, extreme wealth is rarely possible without a family draining more than its fair share of nutrients from society. The Parks must be unfairly benefiting from the system. But more than that, the true leeching is between those of the working class upon each other. It's a zero-sum game, where the only way for the Kim family to find these jobs is to usurp the jobs of other poor families. What we have are two ineffective parasites always trying to drain from the same source, and some will inevitably be pushed out and left with nothing. On top of that, we see the Park family are all emotional parasites. Mr. Park is in desperate need of a friend, someone he can confide in. He admits that he's not in love with his wife and he chooses to have his driver of all people, not some friend or colleague, participate in the fake attack at his son's party. He is clearly lacking in connections. Miss Park is incompetent, heavily reliant on her servants, and likely in need of a therapist. The daughter is in desperate need for someone to understand her, to not be alone with these people, and Da-song is in need of a proper parental figure, someone who will both discipline and educate him. Because of these vulnerabilities, the Parks unfairly tap into the emotional labor and support of the Kim family. And if we take the literal interpretation of the Kims being parasites, we have a funny connection between the principal character's morality. Ms. Kim lives because Ms. Park lived, Ki-woo lives because his student lives, Ki-Jung died because Da-song had his seizure. The movie states it only takes 15 minutes for the child who has a seizure to die, so perhaps he passed away on the way to the hospital. Lastly, Ki-Taek. As Mr. Park died, he will either die in the basement or he will live on only because, as a parasite, he has found a new host in the new homeowners. While not strictly in the film, the poster imagery also brought some interesting symbolism. Black and white lines across the eyes of the cast. Black to represent the poor, white to represent the rich. You can see their clothing also follows this line of thought. And as an Easter egg, you can see Ki-Jung's legs coming into the frame, insinuating and foreshadowing her eventual death. And you know what? I just like this film, man. Everything is foreshadowed but still surprising. Each scene is shot and crafted with obvious intent and precision. The characters feel real. They're funny and heartbreaking. You walk out of this film feeling emotional, hopeful, but knowing everything is hopeless. Sad, even though it's fiction. Deflated, knowing there is truth to the overriding message. It's a ride, it's fun, and it deserves all the awards it has and will continue to receive. And those, ladies and gentlemen, are 45 reasons why Bong Joon-ho is a fucking king. I hope our video was the dopamine hit you needed to procrastinate whatever real-world obligations you have. But hey, maybe it's time you did that thing you were meant to do now. If you enjoy listening to commentary on narrative, whether it be in films, books, or video games, maybe take a chance and subscribe. And thanks for watching something that two people put a lot of thought and effort into making. Hopefully I'll see you next time.